Welcome to another video. Tonight we have 6 stories, from stories of cursed films, haunted Airbnbs, and more. If you have a story of your own, it can be sent to reddit.com/r/slumberreads. These videos do take me quite a bit of time to create, so if you're feeling generous, and if you feel this video is worth one, please be sure to drop a like. It helps the channel more than most think. Subscribing if you're new is also greatly appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. The Black Bogart. That's what they called my grandfather. That's what they called Randy Gray. He wasn't a star. Nowhere near the A-list except for in my mother's heart. But Randy carved out a career in the golden age when doing so wasn't common for black leading men, especially in the film noir genre. Randy's movies weren't well known to the masses. Granted, they were barely movies. We're talking a handful of serials and one reel wonders. Except for Dark Knight at the Beresford. This was the only official feature my grandfather starred in, and I knew exactly nothing about it. Hell, no one did. Growing up a part of the Gray lineage made me an even bigger classic movie fan than I would have otherwise. After all, Mom and Dad both loved the black and white staples. That was what bonded us above all. Cinema. But then came the tragic inevitable. My father passed when I was 20. And now nearing 30, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Literally on her deathbed, and yet she still didn't know what happened to her grandfather. What made Gray, aka Stanley Howard, disappear from her life all those years ago? The year he abandoned them was 1951, and also the year he vanished off the face of the earth. The same year Dark Knight at the Beresford finished filming. As a kid, I was curious, but now I'm fascinated about him, especially with every day, every passing moment of my mother's life, so important. Of course, growing up, she never mentioned the importance of knowing what happened to her dad, but now with over 30 years experience, I knew how she operated. I knew deep down she wanted to know. I did what I could. While Mama suffered in Kindred Hospital, I dove into my movie resources, specifically the internet. The IMDb page for Dark Knight gave me a title and my granddad's stage name, but nothing else. No other cast and crew with links. Damn sure no plotline. There was the year 1951, and the odd trivia that this was indeed my grandfather's final film. But there was nothing. No new info, no updates at all. None of the other mainstream movie sites offered me much more, so I turned to blogs. I got nothing new. Nothing regarding what this movie was other than being a lost slice of film noir, only remembered for it being one of the few to feature a black lead, and for inspiring generations of rumors regarding its cursed film status. But the mystery of the mystery didn't satisfy me. I wanted more. But where to turn? All the other listed names in the credits proved to be one-off pseudonyms. The studio went bankrupt immediately afterward. The movie itself never released on VHS, much less DVD. Sure, there were a few forum posts I made out of desperation, but there was one name this Turner Classic Movies enthusiast had to reach out to. The Tsar of Noir himself, Eddie Muller. Shot him an email. Did my best to not sound too much like a cringy fangirl. Once I mashed send, the anxiety only increased. Trembling, I sat at my desk in front of the cheap laptop in this cheap apartment. The LA weather never bothered me, especially not in April, but nothing could stop those chills. The agonizing suspense over a reply that, at best, wouldn't come till tomorrow. That is, until I got a new message. A response from one of my posts over at moviedetective.com. Don't ask. I didn't recognize the email address, nor the name T. Crenshaw. Evidently, my post had caught his eye, and what I got was something oh so cryptic. You might not want to know more about Dark Knight of the Beresford or your grandfather, but if you do, reply. I'll be waiting. So the message was weird, but it was a hit. It was something. I told T. Crenshaw I wanted to know more, and right after mashing send, another message arrived. One from Eddie Mueller. He knew the movie, knew my grandfather, and he wanted to chat on Zoom. Eddie, just as curious as me. I thought it may have been a joke. Then again, my profile pic may have helped pique Eddie's interest, so I copy and pasted the code and hopped in on the video call. Eddie was waiting, and he was just as handsome on my laptop as he was every Saturday at midnight. Leaning over, I flicked on a lamp. Better lighting to not make me seem like a complete weirdo sitting in the dark. Only Eddie's bedroom stayed far from well lit. A double indemnity poster on his back wall was all that could be seen. Then again, the guy made his career off living in the shadows, so I shouldn't have been too surprised. The conversation went smoothly. We introduced ourselves. Eddie more than courteous, but then the topic switched to my grandfather's film. Shit got real. The gleam in Eddie's eyes grew more vibrant. Well, that movie always interested me. Eddie admitted on screen. He ran a hand through his short gray hair. And not just because it's cursed and missing and whatnot. I just found the history interesting. And what all do you know about the history? I asked. A smile appeared on Eddie's round face. Quite a bit, obviously. Your grandfather was an interesting actor. I enjoyed some of those serials, especially the one with PRC pictures, a saxophone, and a 6-shooter. Always low-budget stuff, but good stuff nonetheless. Chuckling, I nodded. I've seen that one. But I've never actually seen Beresford, only heard of it, and I do know it was Randy Gray's first and only feature. Eddie cracked up momentarily. Then the film scholar returned. Of course, that was it. No one knows what happened to him since. Trying to contain my excitement, I kept calm on the video call, my big eyes starstruck. And that's why I wanted to know. Eddie gave me a respectful nod. Your mother, I know. I'm really sorry, Peyton. But do you know anything else? All this curse stuff? Saying the movie's lost, or when you watch it, you die? It's just so... dumb? Eddie interrupted. Trust me, I know. Leave that mythos to the horror pictures. So what is there? I leaned in closer, intrigued. Leaning back, Eddie reflected for a moment in the darkness. Well, my first instinct is it's a race film. A race film? Yeah, it might be lost, but so are so many in that genre, you see. Eddie moved in toward the laptop camera, letting it capture him for this glorious close-up. Race films were quite common in the 40s, and there were plenty of film noir homages, especially crime movies in general. Gotcha. I mean like Murder on Lenox Avenue, 1940s gang war, even going back to 1935's Murder in Harlem. I've never heard of those. Not many have. Eddie paused to collect those thoughts I cherished so much. These were low budget, probably lower than Poverty Row Productions, man. I imagine so. If they're anything like my grandfather's. Then they're probably pretty good, right? Eddie said with a smile. A saxophone and a 6-shooter is a masterpiece in my opinion. I'll get it up on Nor Alley someday. Instantly my heart pounded at the Eddie Mueller gushing over my grandpa. Trying to keep my cool, I slouched back in my seat. Kept a lethargic Nor vibe. One so chill, Robert Mitchum would be proud. So is that what you think Dark Knight of the Beresford is? A race film? More than likely. That or a stag film. Eddie chuckled. Oh my god, I hope not. I laughed. Hey, I'm respecting the man, the myth, the legend, Randy Gray here. Stanley Howard, I added. Oh, yeah, Eddie went on. But at the same time, I'm just saying that in that climate, black actors and actresses had to take what they could get. There's no shame in your grandfather slumming it. Eddie's sincerity sold me. The Tsar of Nor, somehow reassuring amidst the most uncertain mystery. That's fair, I grinned, knowing good and well how ridiculous my next theory was gonna be. But could this all just be like drive-in, grindhouse type stuff? Maybe it's so indie that even back then, it was gory and had all this crazy sex everywhere. Eddie matched my own laughter. Maybe in the pre-code days, that'd be possible, but certainly not in the 40s. Yeah, Roger Corman wasn't around too much back then. Exactly. Or Herschel Gordon Lewis. Smiling, Eddie motioned his mixed drink toward me. There you go. You know your shit, Peyton. I appreciate it. I beamed. Of course I was flattered, but I knew he had deeper things in store, especially with my mom's limited time. So you don't know anything about the other actors? The director? Eddie shook his head. Nope, not at all, I'm afraid. Then in the dark room he moved his hands about in professor fashion. But look, no one knows anything about them. Nothing except there was a leading lady playing opposite Randy. I've heard that. A slight unease crashed my excitement. But this curse stuff, you're saying none of it's real? No. Hell no. Eddie gave me a smile. Not in my opinion anyway. It's just... I glanced over at my emails real quick. It's just I got this weird message. Someone was telling me they knew about... T. Crenshaw? Eddie interrupted, matter-of-factly. I looked at him stunned. Well, yeah. With a playful scoff, Eddie waved me off. That guy's a nut. Ignore him. Do you know him? Eddie shrugged. Not in person. The confident charisma returning, he sat up straight. I mean, it's the internet, Peyton. Trying to match Eddie's own confidence. Or arrogance. I ran a hand along my scalp. Well, what do you know about him? For once, Eddie shifted in his seat, some shadow sliding over his smile. Honestly, not anything really. Just that he sent me similarly silly stuff about Dark Knight of the Beresford. You don't believe him? Oh, hell no. Eddie dismissed. He's just another troll. I've never gotten a real name from him. No proof, no nothing. Regardless of Eddie's comments, I felt my heart sink a bit. My dim hope giving in to despair. Those crazies are a dime a dozen. Eddie reassured me. He sent me all sorts of weird shit, like pictures of me at Noristas, dark underbellies, all my favorite bars and restaurants. I cringed, yet felt a new emotion. Fear. That's kinda creepy. Chuckling, Eddie gave me a carefree shrug. Hey, at this point, you get used to it. That's show business, right? That's not even counting all the other messages he sent. The videos. By now, Eddie's smile was omnipresent. Almost like he was flattered to be famous enough to have his own stalker. To live out his own film noir scenario. But one that in my opinion was quickly veering toward horror territory. I even deal with him on Twitter. Eddie raised his drink. His second one during this conversation. Myself on a second glass of Pinot Grigio. But what can you do, man? People are fucking crazy. He took a quick, reassuring swig. You just gotta get used to it in this line of work. I grinned. I can only imagine. From there, our chat got more lighthearted, less about internet psychos and more about a chance for us to meet and further discuss the Beresford mystery. We settled on Norista's, a cafe/bar Eddie frequented. Immediately after setting the date, Eddie and I did a friendly, if awkward, goodbye. Awkward mostly due to my fangirl status. I leaned back and took another sip, relishing what looked to be quite the adventure. Then in the midnight silence, a notification popped up. A new email from that same address. That same weirdo. T. Crenshaw had a new message. Ask Eddie about me. I left it at that. After all, why tempt trolls? That Thursday, I saw Mom before making my way out. The 5-hour drive plodding but peaceful. By nightfall, I rolled up to the dead parking lot. Not many cars were in sight. San Fran had a dead calm. Norista's even deader. The Roxy Theater, a dollar cinema located right beside it, looked abandoned. Tucked away in what appeared to be the remnants of a closed nightclub, Norista's was appropriately claustrophobic. Shiny framed movie posters lined up along the pitch-black walls. All of them vintage. All of them classic film noirs. Okay. Hitchcock's Rope, maybe debatable. The bar, an impressive array of both beer and the harder stuff. The coffee makers and stovetops in mint condition considering they appeared to be from the 40s. All in all, we had ourselves a diner/bar/coffee shop combo, and Norista's excelled at all three. Furniture and props were scattered about like a most morbid museum. I saw a literal Maltese falcon. The suitcase-like box from Kiss Me Deadly, Barbara Stanwyck's double indemnity anklet, even the rug from a neo-noir like The Big Lebowski, that really tied the cafe together. A jukebox kept the fatalistic vibes going with a dark jazz that was only broken up by the occasional crooner or movie score. I stopped next to a vintage phone booth and stood there in awe. The smell of a most fresh coffee mesmerizing. But I had my eyes on those cocktail signs. Their pictures and descriptions showcasing North-themed drinks that most certainly had my name on them. I only saw 3 other customers. Just 2 servers, but this was 5 people too many for me, especially since I was 15 minutes early, and Eddie didn't exactly scream Mr. Punctuality. I veered toward a glass door on the right, toward a smoker section that must have shamed its gumshoe chain smoker imitators, given its crawl space size arena. Apparently the discouragement of nicotine worked considering I was the only one in this cage. I took a seat and turned to see a window, showcasing the dark San Francisco streets. Those Venetian blinds, another nice touch. To my relief, there was no lingering cigarette smoke. The ashtrays surprisingly empty. The waitress was even friendlier than I expected, thankfully not channeling the hard-boiled dialogue we loved from the genre. I started off with the Mildred Pierce. The liquor was smooth. Before I knew it, 20 minutes went by and still there was no sign of Eddie. Fuck it, I thought. I got ready to call him when my phone vibrated. A new email greeted me. T. Crenshaw. The subject line, I know the truth. Of course I clicked it. Another cryptic message spilled out. If you really want to know the truth, come with me. I have the movie. I know what happened to Randy Gray. I scoffed, but somehow an unsettling suspicion lingered. What if he really was telling the truth? What if Crenshaw wasn't just some random weirdo, but did have a copy of the movie no one had seen in almost 70 years? But then I dropped the delusion. By now, I'd finished the Mildred Pierce and either needed more, or Eddie Mueller. Raising my phone, I turned, then looked on in shock, a slowly rising fear settling in. A tall, scrawny man stood right outside the window, his arms folded, his stature strong and poised in that dark business suit. Sunglasses disguised the eyes, a fedora disguised his hair, but nothing hid the man's sly smirk. Those chiseled dimples, even beneath the weak streetlights, an eerie confidence just radiated off him. The Venetian blinds, jagged filter, making him all the more menacing. You didn't have to make a move, didn't have to tell me his name. Through the horror, I knew this was T. Crenshaw. Fighting the inner panic, I stumbled to my feet and slapped a 20 on the table. One quick look back at the window showed me Crenshaw was gone, but I was too scared to relax now. I dialed Eddie. To my relief, he answered quickly. "Hey, I'm sorry, Peyton. I was just about to leave," he said. "He's following me," I yelled. "What? Who?" "That creepy guy on the internet." Another glance at the window just showed me a desolate San Fran Crenshaw. On the other end, I heard Eddie pause. A rare sigh escaped his lips, a rare glimpse of unease in his tone. "Shit. Just come to my house. I'll shoot you the address." But what about Crenshaw? Feeling my anxiety hit overdrive, I looked at the glass door. By now, only the waitresses were left. Should I call the cops? "No." Eddie's firm response. "Just come over. Keep your eyes and ears open, but get in your car. Just drive here. We'll talk about it when you get here." Not gonna lie, deep down I was glad his lethargic coolness was back. I was comforted by Eddie's casual cadence. "Is that cool?" Eddie continued. "I'm sending it now." I felt my phone buzz with his escape plan. "I'll see you there. Be safe." I hung up and faced the door. A slight meditation, or hesitation, that lasted only a few seconds. Then I walked on in. At first, it was smooth sailing. With all the patrons gone, the jazz now sounded louder in this empty stage. The music a manic, eerie loop that brushed against my flesh like an October wind. I noticed more shadows following me, but figured it was just the lamps working their magic. I waved at the barista. "Have a good night." But again, a horror washed over me. I saw T. Crenshaw standing in the phone booth. Damn sure not using it for a call, but to chill. To watch me. Because regardless of the sunglasses, I knew that's what he was doing. I moved quicker. All while Crenshaw kept his gaze locked in on me. Out the store I went, straight out into a chilly spring night. Of course, I didn't slow down. I'd seen too many films, noir, and horror movies, to linger when a stalker was on my hands. Instead, I took Eddie's advice. I drove on over to his place, a modest yet big cabin located in the San Fran heartland. Earlier, he texted me the code to get through the gate, so there were no problems there. Upon entry, I was even more impressed. Well, this wasn't noirista's Eddie had his share of the genre's most memorable memorabilia. Rare film noir posters, the trophies hanging on each and every wall. Eddie's DVD collection absolutely astonishing. In his living room, I conversed with an idol that was even handsomer in person. Eddie's charisma carrying over off screen. "Yeah, that Crenshaw guy? I've seen him around a time or two," Eddie said as he nursed a cocktail. I clinged to the Cosmo he'd made me moments earlier. It was just creepy. A slight smile crossed my lips. More Hitchcock than noir, I guess. Eddie bobbed his head side to side, contemplating my analogy. Fair enough. Brushing my bangs back, I looked over at the layout. Besides the Lady from Shanghai poster, I noticed other things. There was Eddie's cat Charlotte strolling by, a bookshelf dominated by Raymond Chandler, and Dorothy B. Hughes, in a bar that was far less impressive than I expected. Certainly nothing like the home bar I'd seen on Eddie's YouTube videos. Consider this drunk disappointment in her fellow alcoholic. Granted, as a guy, I probably felt less threatened. Eddie went on. He shrugged his shoulders with a playful gusto. I get used to the stalkers, but yeah, he's creepy, no doubt. A sincere sympathy showed through the sarcasm. I'm sorry you had to experience that on your first night. I faced Eddie. Thanks. I appreciate that. I watched him take another sip. Certainly not the first Eddie had had tonight, yet he was still so handsome in that suit. But what more can you tell me about my granddad? Eddie paused, clearly taking note of the more focused demeanor I was forcing. Just Eddie and the Cosmo were so damn distracting. Randy Gray wasn't a bad man, Eddie said. I will say that he was ahead of his time from what I understand. So what's the full story then? I challenged. Why did he abandon my mom? Put on the spot, Eddie stole another swig. If he was this relatively famous figure in film noir, I went on. Look, it was a different time back then. Eddie finally answered. We all know that. Granted, he was right, but that didn't stop me. But besides the racism... Listen, it was more than racism, Eddie said. He put the glass to his lips before pausing. It was much worse, I mean. So, what? They ran him out of the industry? After another sip, Eddie aimed those bright eyes at me. Well, can you name me another successful black actor in film noir besides him? One that lasted as long as he did before the disappearance? I didn't have an answer. Sure, there was Harry Belafonte in a classic like Odds Against Tomorrow, but black actors and actresses weren't exactly excelling back then, Eddie said. He leaned back against the countertop, leaning next to an autographed Lawrence Tierney photograph. A picture of the notorious noir heavy standing next to her, a much younger Eddie. It's very possible your grandfather just got left out of the industry. Whether he was blackballed or just left to do other things. But that doesn't explain the mystery. I interrupted. I mean, why is there so much mystique around Dark Knight at the Beresford? Keeping his charismatic cool, Eddie held his arms out. It's a lost movie, Peyton. This shit happens. So maybe his disappearance is just as mysterious. Okay, maybe it is. I couldn't help but notice the allured way Eddie watched me take another sip. Or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe Peyton Hardin's thirst was taking over. Trust me, I'm as big a fan of your grandfather's as anyone. Eddie admitted that with that beaming smile. In fact, let me show you something. From there, he led me toward the very back of the house. A much darker arena. A literal home theater. The big screen was glorious and retro enough, and rather than hideous seats and sticky floors, we had sofas and psychedelic rugs, not to mention the home bar of both my dreams and Eddie's best uploads. Immediately I nabbed another drink. This one, Eddie's infamous assassin cocktail. Needless to say, it was strong and good, and hit quick. Eddie put on a saxophone and a six-shooter. Certainly I'd seen it before, just never on the big screen. Never around such enthusiastic company. Eddie slid in front of me, his tall frame not much higher than mine. Albeit, he was still so handsome. We'll check out the Beresford tomorrow, he said. See what we can find at all the filming locations. Sounds like a plan. But I want to help you, Peyton. Honestly. I gave him a mischievous smile. My mom would appreciate it. She always thought you were cute. The upteenth mixed drink helped make Eddie crack up. That's nice of her. He leaned back against the couch. I can't imagine how much she means to you. And now this whole... In professor mode again, he started talking with his hands, spilling some of the drink. This mystery with her dad, I know it means a lot to you to give her some closure. With a trembling grasp, he took another sip. Never before had I seen Eddie Mueller get emotional. Sympathetic, sure, but never this shook up. Then again, this wasn't TV. Thank you, I responded. Fighting back tears, Eddie looked off at the screen, his tough facade not allowing him to give in to this vulnerable state. I spent a lot of time with my mom, too. He gave me a weak smile. We watched a bunch of movies together. Oh, I'm sure. I pointed the assassin at him. And my mom damn sure loves watching you. Eddie chuckled. It keeps her going. Just me and those Saturday nights with Eddie, she tells me. My dad was that way as well. Eddie started. That's how we bonded. He waved toward the screen. Movies. This was the most personal episode of Noir Alley yet, and it was all for me. I stood there, mesmerized, spellbound by the Tsar. Eddie stood up off the couch. We'll get to the bottom of this. He held up his drink. For your mom. Then he escaped into the martini, literally drowning out his sorrow. I followed suit. The buzz then re-emerged in both of us. Our smiles collided. I gazed on at Eddie's face. Not even sudden gunfire from the movie made us jump. Breaking the slowly smoldering tension, Eddie stepped closer. You don't have a boyfriend in LA? The question caught me off guard. Not that I was against it. What do you mean? Using his drink, Eddie pointed toward my pocket. You haven't been on your phone much. Well, not every young person stays on their phone 24/7. I teased. Oh, I know. Eddie smiled. I just figured you might have been talking to a guy or girl. I laughed. Well, no. There's no one in my life right now. Besides Mom, anyway. Same here, Eddie said. Minus the mom part. I'm sorry. Eager to cheer him up, I gave Eddie a quick toast. But nice observation. Hey, I've done a lot of research. Watched a lot of detective movies. I like to think I'm the same way. Another sip of that assassin accelerated the confidence. That's like what we're doing now, isn't it? Especially visiting the hotel. A crime scene. I stepped in closer, closing the distance between Mueller and I. Two privates working the case. Sure. Eddie shrugged his shoulders. For such a clever neurologist, he was an obvious flirt. Or maybe you're the femme fatale. Think that's you. I hurled back with a smile. Oh, I like that. He pointed the martini at me. Post-feminist noir. Exactly. Brief silence then struck. Nothing awkward at all. Our smiles staying put. Our stare starting to simmer at this point. The police siren blared off the screen, its shrill beat matching my heartbeat. Eddie couldn't help but smirk at the film, then turned to face me once more. So when was the last time you went on a date to the movies? The confidence hit its peak. I staggered up to this Turner Classic movie, Matinee Idol. The sexy host transplanted straight from Mom's TV right to my fingertips. Tonight. The only reply I needed. To my relief, Eddie didn't resist. Instead, he caught me in his arms, still spilling more booze. Then I went in for the kill. A kiss to kill, that is. Together, our lips invented a new mixed drink, but the smell of alcohol didn't bother me. Nothing could bother us in this moment. A film noir behind us was our romantic beach view. Eddie's bar, our hotel suite. Grinning, I pulled back, one hand wrapped around Eddie's neck, the other holding on to that assassin for dear life. "You're good," I said with a sly charm that'd make Bogart and Bacall proud. "Likewise," Mueller replied. I felt along Eddie's chest, then felt literal heavy metal where his heart should have been. "What the hell?" I smirked. "Sorry." Eddie laughed. He placed his martini on a counter before reaching inside his coat's breast pocket. "What is it?" Eddie pulled out a glorious flask, one with Barbara Stanwyck as double enmities Phyllis Diatrixin engraved on it. Totally badass. "Wow," I exclaimed. Full of pride, Eddie held it closer to me, his megawatt smile making this film noir world so much brighter. To me, anyway. "Hey, you gotta be prepared, man." That night was bliss, the joy lasting all the way to morning. There was a movie marathon in that screening room, a marathon of booze brought to us by that lovely bar, and the fun continued all the way to Eddie's bedroom. The following day I got up around 9. Well, Eddie was in the shower. I pulled my hair back in a messy ponytail. On the nightstand, Eddie's iPhone buzzed to life. Then that fear returned, an anxiety burrowing itself deep inside me. Eddie had an email notification from an address I was all too familiar with. T. Crenshaw. I grabbed his phone. To my surprise and secret joy, the preview was lengthy. I saw most of the message, the key phrasing hitting me like shocking jolts from a Nora era's electric chair. "You better meet me tonight. I told you I'd only talk to you like you said. I'll leave her alone till we're face to face." Many emotions hit me, conflicted me. So we were going to the Beresford Hotel not due to Eddie's intuition, but because of the stalker Eddie told me he'd blocked. "I didn't want to tell you." Eddie struggled to explain at his minibar. By now, we were dressed and ready to go. Eddie in a checkered blazer, myself in a red sundress. Both of us chill but professional, and holding our respective drinks. Two postmodern private eyes. "I know Crenshaw was making you nervous, but you didn't have to lie," I interrupted. I know. Eddie gazed down at his bullion. "Look, I was gonna tell you when we were out." He smiled at me. One he knew was so cute. "Called a surprise, I guess." I laughed. The second frozen margarita helping his cause. "I know, Groaning, I leaned back against the bar counter. "It's just freaked me out a little." "Well, I knew he was bothering you. I just decided to ask him about the Beresford and see what he had to say." Intrigued, I watched him. I gotta say the excitement replaced my disappointment. My first ever crime case ready to kick off. A twinkle appeared in Eddie's blue eyes. "But hey, let's get lunch at Dog Patch. That's where they shot the opening scene. Well, supposedly." So we ate at Dog Patch. Then later checked out various sites where Dark Night at the Beresford were rumored to have been shot. Of course, no one knew shit about it. This was a lost movie after all. The two of us had fun. The investigation turning into a date the more it went on. Playing part-time tour guide and full-time film geek, Eddie's charisma never melted. The weather may have been perfect, but our chemistry became scorching hot by the time we made our way over to the Beresford for another round. For the meeting with Crenshaw. He was supposed to meet us at the hotel bar at 8. And once 9 o'clock rolled around, We both began to doubt Crenshaw's appearance. Not that we cared. The bar served them up strong, and Eddie and I were enjoying one another's company, with or without the stalker. Only one thing broke up the good vibes. A text. I checked my phone to see a picture message from Mom. She looked somewhat better. Or at least that gorgeous smile made it seem so. She was still in a hospital bed, the caption beneath her pic bringing back both the drive and disappointment I felt. Have you found anything? Miss you. Eddie sensed my sudden sadness. Are you alright? He leaned in closer next to me, keeping a respectful distance. Peyton. Everything was too much. The failed mystery, Crenshaw the no-show, and most of all, my mom's deteriorating condition. I demanded to leave and go straight to my safety net. Film Noir, Noiristas to be exact. We don't have to go there, Eddie had protested. Let's go somewhere else. Maybe Dark Underbellies. But I wasn't having any of it. I stormed out until Eddie pulled me back. Until I strong-armed him back to the salvation of Noiristas. The bar was quiet even on a Friday. Especially the smokers section I led Eddie into. A room completely empty besides us, and thankfully, empty of current cigarette smoke. We ordered our drinks and appetizers and waited. It wasn't long before I felt my phone vibrate. Thinking it was Mom, I rushed to check the screen. The new email was from Crenshaw. I now felt a fire inside. Not sadness, but a spark of excitement. Quickly, I opened the message before even scanning the preview. Why didn't you show? It read. Then I saw another email arrive. Another one from Crenshaw. We were supposed to meet at the Roxy. I told Mueller. More anger hit me than anxiety, especially toward Eddie. I looked over at him. Immediately my glare brought him out of his buzz. Peyton, what's wrong? He asked, concerned. I showed him the message. Enough said. Eddie groaned, guilty as charged. The guy's a creep, Peyton. It doesn't matter. I started. I don't want him leading you into anything crazy. You lied to me, I told him. The drink's making my subtle rage a bit too transparent. Again. Okay, look. Eddie collapsed back in his seat. There's more. Why'd you lie to me? You said this was about finding the truth. I'm sorry. Eddie sighed. Unsettled, he collapsed back in his chair, a flustered frustration crashing his cool demeanor. But there's more to this. Like what? I slammed my hand on the table. This is the goddamn reason I'm here, Eddie. I want to know the truth. I know. So stop fucking lying to me. Eddie paused. He looked off at the window, purposefully dodging my irate stare. It might not be what you expect. I don't care. Trembling, Eddie faced me. I mean, it might not be what you or anyone wants to know, Peyton. The scary sincerity startled me. I couldn't talk. Instead, I just watched Eddie. Look, I was trying to help, Eddie said. I mean, do you really want to know this? Do you really want to know the total, brutal truth? Because this is your grandfather we're talking about here. I don't know if it was the day drinking, the mommy memories, the ultimate need for answers, but whatever it was, I fucking snapped. I grabbed Eddie by the blazer collar, startling the shit out of him. You listen to me, I said. I came here to find out what happened to Julie Hardin's dad. I threw Eddie back in his seat, my sheer strength and willpower keeping him silent for once. And I'm not stopping till I get a goddamn answer. Then I did the unthinkable. I abandoned both my idol and another, Mildred Pierce, to storm toward the exit. That is, until Eddie's voice stopped me. "Peyton," he said. I stopped at the door to face him, my glower contrasting his stoic stare. "I wanted you to make your own decision," Eddie said. "Okay, that's all." "I will," I replied. A nervous Eddie ran a hand through his hair. "All right, I'll be here. I'll wait for you." I didn't even respond. Without further ado, I bid farewell to Eddie Mueller without ever actually doing so. The Roxy came calling, T. Crenshaw specifically. The theater was right beside Norista's. I didn't need Crenshaw's help considering there was only one screen in play tonight. The walls were bare, the lighting minimal, the concession booth a graveyard of expired candy. The place made grindhouses of yesteryear look like movie palaces. I didn't even message Crenshaw upon stepping inside theater number 1. A sticky floor greeted me. I saw several broken seating chairs and a screen of many wrinkles. I was the only person in attendance other than the man in the fedora, the weird guy I saw in the Norista phone booth just last night. The guy sat in the second to last row and beckoned me to sit right beside him. A middle seat for a perfect view of the black and white movie sprawling before me. Why the hell not? This drunk, I took the bait. I didn't protest. I sat behind Crenshaw. Immediately, Dark Knight at the Beresford grabbed my attention, as any cursed and lost movie on the big screen should. At first, the movie was charming, full of film noir cliches, yet they felt fresh, mostly due to my grandfather's charisma. Black Bogart sold every scene, including a third act that left me horrified. I realized this was why the movie went incognito. Watching Dark Knight's finale deeply disturbed me. There my grandfather was in a cheap 1951 hotel room, a young white woman, his only companion. At first the encounter appeared consensual, until a gun was revealed. A knife, all at the hands of Randy Gray. The woman then went from horrified to helpless, as did the audience. Quickly, the lady was bound and gagged by my grandfather, and a more than willing cast and crew. Unspeakable acts happened, the type of disturbing behavior too sickening to explain in detail. A gruesome slaughter captured on camera. What I was watching no longer became obscure film noir, but sensationalized snuff, and my grandfather was the star. Soon the screen faded to black. Only the theater's humming, antiquated air conditioning could be heard. No credits helped explain the movie's obscurity, aside from the horrific crime it showed on celluloid. I sat there in the cold, my body petrified in fear, my mind wallowing in repulsion, and a hand through my tears. Shedding tears not for Stanley Howard, but the lady in the movie, my grandfather's victim. Up above, dim lights flickered. Now the man in the fedora stood in front of me. This much closer, I saw wrinkles, another telltale sign of old age. Regardless of the sunglasses, I knew he was staring right at me, his stance still somber, a film noir grim reaper. But I didn't say anything. I needed to go. In one sickened swipe, I knocked the tears away and stood up. Then the man took off the glasses. A pair of big, soulful eyes greeted me, a sharp contrast to his cryptic costume. No wonder he kept them hidden. Her name was Sharon Maven, Crenshaw said, his voice vulnerable, meek. He lowered the shades as he looked away, exhaled in a painful gasp. She was my mother. Shit, I thought. And to think her humiliation, her death was on film. Forever. I'm sorry. I forced out through the yawnies. Really? Using the sunglasses, Crenshaw pointed toward the screen. It took me decades to find a copy. I let him do the talking. What else could I do? I stayed put in shame. I wanted to know what happened to her. Crenshaw went on. He hesitated. Kinda like you. Just like me, I responded. Gonna take it to the police. T. Crenshaw trembled there, nervous, trying to be as gentle as possible when it was his mom that was butchered. I want the whole world to know what happened. Maybe they'll find her remains. I don't know. I just want closure. I understand. I do. He gave me a tip of the fedora. I just wanted you to know first. If you really wanted the truth, of course. I did. Then I turned, ready to leave the whole fucking scene behind. I gave Crenshaw a sympathetic look. But I'm sorry. Started to walk away. Until... Do you want to know more? Stopped and turned to see Crenshaw. Some confusion appearing in his anguish. About your grandfather, he added. I know what happened to him. With a disgusted smirk, I shook my head firmly. No, I'm good. The man nodded. Then a sudden thought struck. A terrifying one. Just one thing. I sniffed and wiped away any trace of tears. Were there more? An uncomfortable Crenshaw paused. More movies? Yeah, I replied, my voice now more detached. I nodded over at the screen, the huge blank canvas like a ghostly portal. Ones like that, where he killed someone. At first, Crenshaw didn't say anything, his discomfort further manifesting itself in the form of restless hands and shifty eyes. I knew the answer. All Crenshaw did was give me a nod. I then left the Roxy in silence. I walked alone. Los Angeles and my mother's final days were calling me. Of course, I didn't know what to tell her. Who would? I just had one more stop before dialing an Uber. Behind a cynical glower, I stopped outside Norista's smoking section window for one last look into this San Francisco noir world I was all too eager to leave. There was Eddie at the table, still waiting. By now, several empty drinks, part of his booze body count. Currently, he nursed a cup of coffee. I watched him pull the flask out of his breast pocket. Eddie always with a penchant for making his drinks stronger. Non-alcoholic beverages be damned. As he poured the bourbon into the coffee, Eddie looked up. He saw me. Instantly, his expression veered from neutrality to weary resignation. Eddie knew. He knew all along. He didn't stand up. He didn't rush out to greet me. There'd be no sappy reconciliation. No sentimental value. He knew how this story would end. We all did. Eddie put away the flask. Holding his latest cocktail, he stared on at me. My glare not going anywhere. Our exchange probably lasted seconds but felt like an eternity. After all, I felt born again when he called me. I felt alive when he investigated with me. Then I died when he lied to me. Finally, I turned and walked out into the dark night. I haven't talked to Eddie Mueller since, nor did I ever reach out to Crenshaw again. I don't know what happened to my grandfather. I don't know if he went into hiding or got arrested or went overseas. I just hope he's dead. I have a, whatever the opposite of a recommendation is, to make for a cottage my wife and I booked on Airbnb. Maybe someone can help fill in the details I'm having trouble remembering. I hope so. My wife and I live in Virginia along with our dog, Algernon. We both work and have a decent amount of friends, or friendly acquaintances at least, so our lives are relatively busy. Now don't get me wrong. We're both homebodies as much as we can manage, but the social pull of the occasional brunch and the need to buy groceries, fold laundry, walk the dog, etc. tend to fill up a calendar. It's because of all this that whatever we can get away with for a weekend, we try to. Last fall, my wife Olivia was finishing a months-long project at work. As it happened, I had a week or so of twiddling my thumbs on the horizon at my job. We decided to seize the opportunity and make a 3-day weekend in the Blue Ridge Mountains. My coworker, Martin, invited himself along, but being friends outside of work, we were happy to have him. Now, here's where I have to start relying on some kind of fuzzy memories. We found a place to rent on Airbnb for a steal. I recall the host saying that there was a cancellation, but when I later went back to check the website, I found nothing. My bank account, and my emails. Nothing. No mention of the cottage at all. I call it a cottage, but if you're thinking of a log cabin in the woods, you're picturing it wrong. Think more Rivendell from the Lord of the Rings movies, but with a chef's kitchen. You get the idea. I had asked my wife what she thought, and she matter-of-factly said, "Honey, I would fuck that house." So it was settled. A week later, we left. I couldn't tell you where we drove exactly after we got off the Skyline Drive. My Maps app doesn't seem to remember either, but the mountains were beautiful as we slowly curved around the meandering scenic roads. Yellows, tawny reds, campfire oranges, and blues as they stretched onward into the distance. We took our time, stopped at overlooks, bought some fresh vegetables at a roadside stand. At the vegetable stand, the seller, a friendly woman in a thick sweater and jeans, asked us where we were staying. I told her. Now, I can't remember what I said, but I can remember the look in her eyes. A look of fear. Warning. I now know. She had gripped my wrist so tightly, but then said, "Enjoy your stay. It's a really beautiful cottage." What was that? My wife asked as we drove away. I don't know. Mountain flirting? I joked uneasily, watching the seller's terrified face as it shrank away in my rearview mirror. Martin's blue Jetta was parked next to the cottage as we pulled up. We took the place in through the sap-freckled windshield of our SUV. Large, vaguely Nordic, in pale creams and whites with an A-frame roof and a wraparound screened-in porch. I can still picture it perfectly in my mind. I've even tried to draw it a few times. I'm no great artist, but I can draw well enough. Even so, the pictures always end up looking like heavy-handed scribbles. We took our groceries and bags out of the car, and looked forward to sun-dappled hikes and cool, lazy evenings drinking wine and listening to the music of the crickets. Martin greeted us at the door after we passed through the rocking chair-laden porch. I say greeted, but really he stood in the doorway as Olivia opened it. He looked, I don't know, tired, I suppose. "Hi, Marty," my wife said, throwing her arms around him in an ungraceful, very Olivia hug. Martin stared at me over my wife's shoulder, his eyes widening in a look somehow reminiscent to the vegetable sellers. His bottom lip was trembling slightly, and as I knitted my brow in confusion, he whispered, "Don't." Olivia continued, exuberant and oblivious. My God, feels like it's been months. What about this place? It's fucking gorgeous, right? Where's... Fuck. Try to remember it all, but some of the details still evade me. Come on. Oh my goodness, Livy. Gorgeous. Wait until you see the view from the balcony off the loft. Chills, but first, wine. Just like that, Martin exploded into his usual extroverted self. Olivia had pushed past him and boom. A joke? I wondered as I hefted a duffel onto my shoulder and held the tiny handle of my wife's rolling suitcase. Maybe Martin had run into the same vegetable seller on the way up. He did have a sometimes overly dry sense of humor. I justified the shift in my mind. The commonalities of the afternoon were coincidence. A feeling needling in the back of my mind told me something was wrong, but I ignored it. I was being paranoid. As I stepped through the door, I was struck by the beauty of the space. There was an ethereal, almost heavenly quality to it. Large picture windows ran up the far side of a great room, split by a loft where a number of plush leather club chairs sat partly hidden by a carved wooden railing. The main seating area was sunken into the floor, an inviting nest of stylish Scandinavian mid-century furniture, and a cast iron standalone fireplace. Otis Redding's voice drifted through the air in a cut of "The Dock of the Bay" I'd never heard. "No TV, huh?" I remarked, putting down the bags. "And you'll have to thank the host for that, and for the wine," Martin said, pouring another 2 glasses of red wine to join his own. "Don't worry, Will. There's a record player. Take off your shoes and dust off some of those moves I saw at your wedding." He must have seen me frown or something, because he continued with, "Well, come on, man. If you're so hard up for a screen to sit in front of, I remember the website saying there was a TV in the basement." My wife's and Martin's idea of relaxation was slightly different from my own. They'd dance and sing and get drunk, but I needed a ball game from time to time. It could wait a while, though, I thought. For now, I'd enjoy the serenity of our little woodland paradise. I don't remember much of the rest of the day. We drank wine, I'm sure, and I seem to remember helping Olivia make a grilled cheese sandwich with a cast iron skillet and press. All in all, the day and night was uneventful. Until around 2 a.m., Olivia shook me awake from a sound sleep. "Will, we forgot Elgie in the car. He's been out there for hours. Baby, he's probably so scared. Can you go get him out?" She was frantic, panicking. "Liv, we took Algernon to a doggy daycare before we left." I croaked groggily. "He's fine, honey. You were the one who walked him in." It took a while for the hyperventilation to calm down, but as soon as it did, she was out like a light. I wasn't so lucky. I lay awake for some time, picturing the face of the vegetable seller. She had seemed so frightened, like a parent watching their child follow a ball into a busy street. I closed my eyes and tried to think of anything else, tried to imagine the next few days. I might have actually started to drift off when I heard the scratching. Being a dog owner, it's not unusual to hear scratching on a door at night, but Algernon was nearly 100 miles away. It was the door to the hall. A distinct, slow scratching. I sat up to get a better listen and thought I saw the doorknob turn ever so slowly. I whispered loudly toward the door. "Martin, we're fine. Olivia was just..." The handle bolt clicked and the door creaked open about a foot. "Martin, we're fine." I waited for a while, watching the door, but it remained still. After a while, I went back to uneasy sleep. In the morning, I asked Martin and Olivia about the night before. Olivia couldn't remember her late night panic, and Martin said he had slept like a log the whole night. I had heard the scratching, seen the door. I had comforted Olivia. At least I thought I had. Maybe this place is haunted, Martin said, smirking as he stirred a mimosa pitcher. Olivia giggled. I think if I died in a place this nice, I might have to haunt it too. The two of them were so peppy, glowing even. I felt as though I had pulled a double shift on a factory line. The mimosas did help, though the sparkling wine the host had left, just like the Shiraz the day before, had a slight acrid tang. Like licking a coin on the first sip. Evelyn Estate, I noted. A name that seemed familiar enough, but one I would be sure to forget in future grocery trips. Hey Marty, did you pass a vegetable stand on the way in? I asked, trying to reason around his odd greeting. No, we came straight here. Why? You didn't buy any mountain mushrooms, did you? He hung on the quip, smiling. Oh, come on, that was a joke. I felt nauseous all of a sudden. His joke that I had assumed from the day before. Don't what? I ruminated the rest of the morning, and as Olivia cleared the champagne flutes and juice cup from the table, I asked if anyone wanted to go for a hike. Oh, babe. We were going to go through the vinyl collection and see what gems this place is hiding. But you should go. Work up that feral mountain musk. I forced a smile. If Martin wasn't gay, I might have been concerned about Olivia's rebuke. Part of me actually yearned for a feeling as trivial as jealousy. What I felt was dread. Something heavy, growing, but just out of sight. I decided to set out alone, knowing that the crisp autumn air would do me some good. Perhaps it was the unfamiliar setting of the cottage that was unsettling me. How long had it been since I had last slept outside of my own bed? The cottage was perfect in every conceivable way, from the marble-countered kitchen to the spa-like bathroom. But it wasn't home. I hiked a trail that ran behind the cottage, a hilly, beaten path with plenty of boulders and climbs to challenge my body so my mind could rest. The air did seem restorative, and as I rested on a fallen tree at the peak of a rise, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Now understand, at work, I am practically attached to my phone, an occupational codependency that follows me everywhere I go. It was in that moment, looking out over a shallow valley, that I realized I hadn't once thought of the thing that since arriving. Maybe this place is special in some inscrutable way, I thought. My mind might have searched for some whispering insidiousness, because it's detoxing from stress. I pulled out my phone, promising myself that it would just be a glance. 8 missed calls, 23 missed texts. The screen went black. Dead battery. My mind grasped at the void. What had happened? It's Saturday. Algernon, was he okay? If not, why 23 text messages? No, something else. I thought of grim possibilities as I hurried home, nearly rolling my ankle half a dozen times. I must have gotten service momentarily while I was resting. How long was whoever trying to contact me? I walked and walked and walked. For too long. The trail was a straight shot. Somewhat challenging, yes, but there were no intersections. No branches. I guessed that my hike out was around an hour, perhaps 2 miles at my leisurely pace. I'd been walking back for much longer. Where was the cottage? I kept walking and then backtracked, breaking twigs and noting them as I saw them again. I scrutinized the trail, stopping every 100 feet to look around. Where was the damned cottage? My stomach twisted as I considered my predicament. I hadn't brought food or light. I wasn't an outdoorsman. Not really. I was hungry. I would have to sleep outside, shivering in the cold, stomach rumbling. Would Olivia come looking for me? I saw her face in my mind, wandering aimlessly through the dark, calling for me and feeling more and more hopeless, just as I was. I remember sitting down on the path and crying. Actually, crying. Why didn't I turn back at the vegetable stand? The sun was sinking lower and lower into the sky. And then I saw the light from the picture windows of the cottage off in the distance. I had crossed by the same stretch a half-dozen times. It wasn't there. Now it was. I stared at the pointed slivers through the blackening silhouette of 1,000 impassive autumn leaves. Like a campfire, I thought, inviting but hiding a monster just outside its glow. I wanted to leave, to get Olivia, get in the car, and leave. I threw open the front door, but as soon as I entered the cottage, my ordeal seemed somehow distant, dampened. Olivia and Martin sat beside the fireplace as it crackled in time with The Dock of the Bay. The wine looked refreshing, and the glow that permeated the space comforted me like the easy summers of childhood. "Hi, babe. Where did you get off to?" Olivia asked, lazily slurring her words. I remember my search for the cottage clearly now. I have the benefit of perspective, but at the time, I couldn't give my wife a truthful answer. I couldn't remember. It wasn't important. Just popped out for a minute, Liv. She smiled melancholically. Be waiting till the morning, see. Can't waiting till the morning. Be waiting till the morning. I hadn't noticed the record skipping. I was jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass. Disoriented, my head pounding, I looked around the sunken living room. The fire had died in the fireplace, giving the air an oddly stale smell of ash. I was alone in the dark. The middle of the night, I guessed, though my phone was still in my pocket. Still dead. Another glassy eruption. It was close. Above me. The loft. I darted up the stairs, my trail-blistered feet sending angry pulses up my legs. There was a breeze and... Marty, what the hell are you? Martin threw another wine glass at the floor. A single lamp dimly lit the surroundings. He looked gaunt, his skin devoid of its usual color. All over his arms were small, dark rings and circles. I stepped closer. No, not rings. Bite marks. He grabbed another glass and turned toward me, his face, this time unmistakably terrified. "Marty, what's going on? What happened to you?" The opening bass line to The Dock of the Bay began to play loudly from below, and Martin seemed to flinch. This song again? "Liv?" I called down. "I'll be sitting till the evening comes." "Olivia?" She didn't answer. "Marty, buddy, talk to me." He was trembling, shaking. "I saw him, Will. I remember." "Who? Saw who, Marty?" The music was getting louder. "She'll never let us go. We shouldn't have come." "She? Olivia? What the fuck are you talking about? What happened to you?" "She's always here. With them. Always watching. Pulling. Always watching. Slowly and slowly." He was doing a sort of shifting, jittery dance, like a child that needed the potty. This song was always playing. Otis Redding was never my fate. He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening in an exaggerated, animalistic terror that pushed into me like a knife. No, she's... I turned my head slowly and something unseen brushed against my arm. The song was blaring, seeming to nearly vibrate my teeth in my mouth. I turned back to Martin, and he was on the balcony. He looked back toward me. I can't. With an almost graceful agility, he stepped up onto the railing and leaned forward, disappearing over the edge. "Marty, no!" I screamed, as I helplessly watched the split second unfold. I heard my scream. The song had stopped. Marty hadn't made a sound as he fell, but there was a wet thud. I ran over to the balcony, afraid to lean over too far. I couldn't see his body through the opaque blackness below, but I knew he was gone. What had made him do it? Who was she? What? My thoughts spread and thinned and dissipated, muddied by fatigue and shock. My head thrummed, but the rhythm in my temples carried my feet back to my wife. Olivia was sound asleep as I entered the bedroom. I locked the door. I was so tired, so weary, and as I laid my head down, I heard the faint sound of a child crying. So tired, like drowning beneath the weight of spent time. So tired. Tap, tap, tap. I was awake, but lay with my eyes closed for a moment. The light on the other side of my lids seemed bright. Tap, tap, tap. I could hear something faint in the background. Comforting, melodic, beautiful. My head hurt. Tap, 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 tap. No. My head pounded. Coursing icy waves of nauseating pain that jarred my brain in a rhythmic tapping. I felt something coarse and rough beneath me. Not the expensive feeling sheets of the bed. The familiar, enchanting melodies sounded distant, hollow. The light was too bright, but I laboriously pulled open my eyes. Tap. Marty. The events of the night before came rushing back. I was on the floor of the sunken living room. How? I heard Olivia humming through the ringing in my ears, a reverberating echo of the tapping. I pulled myself to my feet. Olivia? Morning, babe. You look like you slept well. I'm just making a picture of Bloody Mary. Extra spicy how you like it. You want one? She was stirring and swaying her hips to whatever song was in her head. Olivia, Martin, last night. Who? She smiled, radiant, beautiful, a divine portrait of my wife in a scarcely buttoned shirt that ended mid-thigh. One of mine. Marty, a sob caught in my throat. He killed himself last night. He jumped off the balcony. Her face softened into a look of vaguely maternal concern. Oh, babe, that's terrible. Was he one of your baseball players? No, Olivia. Martin Harris. Our friend. The one who came with us on this trip. Look, if this is a joke, Liv, it's fucked up. He's dead, Liv. He's fucking dead. She carried a glass over to me, her face bearing the slightest touch of confusion. Will, I can see you're upset, but we came on this trip alone. Our romantic getaway, remember? She ran a finger along the inside edge of the button-down shirt to her navel. I don't know any Martin. She took a sip of the drink and licked her bottom lip. It's just us. No, Olivia, I'm fucking serious. Martin, Will, you're confused. Stressed. Maybe we could just... She closed on me slowly, sliding the shirt up over a bare hip. I could feel the inviting heat of her body, the curve of her... No. Fuck. I tried to focus. Martin, he was dead. Olivia, something's not right here with this place. Don't you see that? That damned song. The wine. When was the last time any of us ate? Everything was coming together. All of the little details. Martin had said he remembered. What were we forgetting? Olivia flexed her hips against me, shrugging the shirt off of one of her shoulders. Her seduction, the cottage. I thought, it's all a seduction. I pulled away from her and ran up the stairs to the loft. Martin was there. He had to be. I saw him jump. As I crossed the loft, a shard of glass bit into my foot, sending me hobbling toward the balcony. The glass that Martin broke the night before. It had happened. I wasn't crazy. I opened the doors, my head in the vice-like grip of a tightening migraine. I looked. Martin, his body, thin and pallid as the night before, sprawled over a wide granite knob that jutted from the earth. But he was mutilated, shredded, innards scattered and muscles torn from bone as if by some wild animal. What had happened to him? What? I heard the music begin to play again. Sitting in the morning sun. I hopped away from the balcony. Olivia, he's down there. He's... Suddenly my thoughts poured out of my head and over my shoulders, washing me in a warm release like coming home from the snow. I heard the shard crunch in my foot as I brought it down. This really is an amazing song. The cottage is magical. I walked toward the stairs, gazing down on the room below. Olivia lay on the sofa, propped up on her elbows, bouncing a raised foot behind her to the rhythm of the song. The shirt she had been wearing sat crumpled on the floor. Our romantic getaway. I remembered. Just us. I awoke on the sofa, my head resting on Olivia's chest. My mind was foggy, but light. Olivia slowly stroked my hair, and as I stirred, she said, I was wondering when you'd wake up. Were we talking about something? I wouldn't say we talked much. She grinned. I felt, in that moment, like I was missing a word on the tip of my tongue. Something slightly elusive, but ultimately unimportant. How long have we been here? I asked. She sighed. Not nearly long enough, but you should really go for a hike. You said the whole way here that you didn't want to sit around the whole time like a vegetable. Vegetable. So how about it? Why don't you go work up that feral mountain musk? Feral. I felt a wave of deja vu come over me. Not a bad idea. I might just pop out for a bit. The words came out of my mouth without my thinking them, but I had some nascent misgivings about the notion of a hike. Had I heard some story about a mountain lion attack? A hiker who had gotten lost? I couldn't remember. Actually, Liv, I think I remember something about there being a TV in the basement. I might check to see if a game's on. I felt her chest rising and falling beneath my head, her breath quickening slightly. Don't. She had whispered the word with a sudden urgency. There was something foreboding and familiar about it, and how she said it, but as I craned my neck to see her face, she looked me into the eyes through heavy lids and slurred out, Don't forget your drink, babe. The door to the basement wasn't obvious. A short door, perhaps 4 feet tall, in the hallway to the bedrooms. I ducked low before carefully descending a flight of steps. Squeaky stairs. My foot hurt like I had accidentally caught a nail or something, but kept heading downward. I heard the sound of static before I noticed the blue-white glow of the television. Did Olivia leave it on? I wondered as I rounded a cobwebby timber wall. The television was small with wood veneer sides and large silver knobs. I sat down in front of it, trying to remember why I had come down in the first place. The dark little space had no discernible lighting, other than the undulating speckles of the screen. But still it felt right. Ah, the photos, I thought, eyeing a tattered shoebox. White edges of Polaroids peeking over the top. I was getting them for... I tried to conjure the name for the face in my mind. That smiling, beautiful, familiar face. What was her name? Honey, I would fuck that house. She was funny. Just us. And sultry. The photos focused me back. Faded pictures of a happy family. A little girl on a rope swing pushed by her father, I supposed. A boy and his mother beaming in dappled light. A teenage girl painting the siding of a dollhouse. A little girl again riding a bike with streamers on the handlebars. Her mother cautiously hovering behind. The hairstyles and clothing suggested late 60s or early 70s. They seemed happy, content. Tap, tap, tap. That sound again. I put a few of the photos in my pocket for tap, tap. What was her name again, and why did my foot hurt? Tap, 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 tap. The sound of the static was so loud, it reminded me of... There was a man. What happened to him? There was a... Tap. Marty. Olivia. It came rushing back and a voice rasped right behind me. You don't belong here. Get out. My head was suddenly stricken with a blinding pain, like someone had struck it with an axe. I looked around frantically, my vision blurry. You don't belong. I felt a sudden chill overtake me and then heard quick footsteps in the distance. The stairs. Will? Olivia screamed from above. Olivia! I shouted back, my voice hoarse, my throat dry. I trudged toward the stairs, limping past my agonizing foot. I felt so weak, feeble, resting at each of the stairs in order to keep going. Olivia screamed again, a piercing, guttural scream. I pulled myself through the small door and onto the dusty floor of the cottage. I could see footprints in the grime, bloody, smeared footprints, small footprints. Large ones, and a distinct set heading away from the basement door. Slimy, long, and black. With great effort, I pulled myself to my feet, rubbing something sticky from my eyes. Blood. Olivia continued. Gut-wrenching cries pushed me forward, down the hall and into the... Stopped dead for a moment, shaking in buffeting waves of horror at what I saw. The thing looked up at me through black eyeless sockets. It was humanoid with glistening skin and mottled gray and white, washed out further by its bloody, lipless mouth. Get out! It shrieked. Olivia was beneath it. She didn't even look like my wife. Thin and pale, missing shredded chunks of her thighs and shoulder. The thing jerked toward her belly and pulled its head back, stretching mangled flesh and bloody pink viscera before gnashing and gulping it down. It was eating her. Olivia pushed and scratched and screamed, and I finally pushed past the terrified shock. Get away from her! I croaked, running forward and ramming into the thing. It tumbled over and I grabbed Olivia, helping her onto her feet. She could barely walk, heaving and retching as she stumbled. I could barely carry her weight, weak and wincing with every step. The door. Just make it to the door. Foot after foot we were getting closer. A few more steps. 2, 1. I passed the threshold. I felt the evening air of the porch. We were free. Safe. Olivia screamed, her body lurching backward. The thing held her wrist, pulling Olivia's chewed, bloody arm. No! Olivia shrieked, the thing's fingers tearing flesh and exposing bone below. I pulled Olivia, leaning my weight forward and bracing against the door frame. I pulled and pulled and pulled, and the two of us tumbled forward and onto the porch. Olivia continued to scream in heaving cries, and as I looked at her, I saw why. Her left arm ended at a tattered stump right at the elbow. I didn't look back as I dragged us across the porch and toward our SUV, but I heard the ripping of meat and the grating of teeth on bone behind me. I don't remember our drive or leaving the cottage. I awoke in a hospital. The doctor said that when we were found, we were dehydrated and extremely malnourished. When Olivia and I didn't come to work on Tuesday, our employers had called our phones. It had actually been Elgrenon's doggy daycare that eventually called the police. Or, rather, animal control on Thursday. We were reported missing when no one could recount for our whereabouts. That was 6 days before we were eventually found. Olivia retched and shook constantly that first day in the hospital. They pumped her stomach and found only coagulated blood. The doctor seemed confused when I mentioned the missing arm and the disembowelment. "We get this sort of thing more than you'd think," he explained. "Hikers go off into the woods without adequate preparation. They get lost, disoriented. Some of them lose touch with reality. Just be glad you're alive." Olivia still has digestive problems. Aches. She walks with a limp and can't use her left arm. I still have daily migraines. Psychosomatic, they tell us. One psychologist after another. The drugs help to dull the pain, but whenever I look at my wife, I see an open belly and a bloody stump. She averts her gaze when I pass by, but days after leaving the hospital, I worked up the nerve to look in the mirror. Nails. Around a dozen of them, tapped deeply into my head. We remembered Marty a couple weeks after we were found. I got in touch with his sister. She says she doesn't know who I am, that she's always been an only child. Company emails, nothing. Wedding photos, nothing. They never found his blue Jetta, and I doubt they ever will. That thing ate Martin, and not just his body, his existence. To my surprise, the Polaroids I took from the basement were still in my pocket when we were found. They don't prove our story, but they seem like proof of something. So I posted them on an online forum centered around Blue Ridge mountain history. Weeks passed and I had forgotten about it. Then one day, I got a message from McCormick413. "I recognize the family in your pictures. Sad story. Horrible story. I came up with the boy, Bobby Stratford. Good kid as I recall, though it's been some years now. Daddy of the family was Big Earl Stratford. He'd gone off on an overnight in the woods with their little girl Penny. Neither came back, hide or hair, just up and vanished. It was a big story at the time for those around, but in truth, there weren't much folks around. Small pond kind of thing. Anyway, some time passed and people forgot about Big Earl and little Pen. Mom of the family's name was Helen, and after her man went to the ground, nobody saw much of her or Bobby or their eldest, Alice, anymore. Then one day in winter, maybe 73, a ranger found Alice wandering the woods alone. Died of exposure the day she got into the hospital. They didn't find Bobby and Helen in their cottage, but they did find blood, and a few years later, a mess of bones buried out back. Thing is, I heard that when they were done the autopsy on Alice, her stomach was filled of meat. Human meat. Some folks said she ate her whole family. Others that it was just Bobby and Helen. A couple locals say she caught her death in the cold looking for another meal. Like I said, sad and horrible. Be well, brother. Alice Stratford. The name taps in my mind. The girl with the dollhouse. The thing that drove my friend to suicide and fed on my wife for days. I didn't tell Olivia about the email. She's been through enough. After remembering Marty, she began to remember someone else. Chris Harris. The name rang a bell. He was Marty's husband. He loved Otis Redding. Marty called him his Frisco Bay, after the song. That song. I started to remember Chris too. Stirring drinks, dancing in the sunken living room. Olivia and I don't talk about it much. She's been through enough. I don't want to burden her with all of the memories that have been slowly seeping back into my head. And I don't have the heart to tell her that just recently. I've begun to remember another guest of the cottage. Evelyn. Our daughter. Time to hit up some yard sales, I screamed to Wayne, my husband, as he groggily pulls himself out of bed early on a Saturday morning. Damn it, Jen. How the hell are you so cheerful this early? It's so annoying. Wayne said as he rubs the crust from his eyes. Fresh pot of coffee is ready for you. I looked at the yard sale groups on Facebook and I found some close. We need to go soon before all the good stuff is gone. I throw him a clean shirt. Come on, get dressed. He reluctantly pulls the shirt over his head. His still groggy mind has trouble finding one of the armholes. It's like watching my toddler put on a shirt for the first time by himself. Good stuff? It's a yard sale. They're trying to get rid of their junk. There is no good stuff, he says, finally finding the right hole to slide his arm into. After sucking down 2 cups of coffee, Wayne is finally done dragging around. We load up and head to the nearest yard sale. It's about a 20-minute drive. Wayne complains the entire ride about wasting time sifting through other people's junk. I smack Wayne's shoulder to get his attention and point at the house. This is a nice house. Her junk might be worth something. He lets out a grunt. We may have gotten lucky with this one. We'll see. The yard is full of those plastic fold-out tables filled with all kinds of goodies. Not 5 minutes in, and I have an armful of knickknacks and a few horror novels. One is The Third Parent by Elias Witherow. One of my favorites, and I can't wait to get home and crack it open. Wayne is just walking around with his hands in his pockets, occasionally picking something up to inspect it, only to set it back down again. Then he stops dead in his tracks and peers off to the edge of the yard near the last folding table. What are you looking at? I ask. Do you see something you like? Maybe, is all he says as he starts a fast-paced walk over to the area. He was looking. Beside the table was a large antenna. She's beautiful, ain't she? Wayne says as he carefully looks the antenna over. He has always been into CB radios, something Wayne picked up from his uncle at a young age. Recently, he has gotten into TV antennas. Tired of paying such high cable bills, he is doing what he can to cut the cord. This is much better than the one we have at home. Do you know how many channels we can pick up with this thing? We pay for our things and hit up a few more yard sale spots before heading home. Wayne can barely contain his excitement as he rounds up his tools and climbs up onto the roof to install his new toy. After a while, I fix some lemonade to take out to him. Perfect timing by me as Wayne climbs down his extension ladder. He takes a few steps back, places one hand on his hip, and wipes away the sweat from his forehead with the other. The summer heat is scorching as it beats down on our backs. He glares up at his new addition to our house. A long-range, high-definition TV antenna. A big eyesore to me, but it's something small that will make him happy. Let's go check it out, he says as he runs up the steps into our house. I followed behind, walking into a refreshing blast of cool air from our air-conditioned home. It instantly starts to dry the sweat from the blistering summer heat. My thoughts of air conditioning being the greatest invention the earth has ever seen are interrupted by Wayne's outburst. Babe, look at this. We're getting local channels from Atlanta and Nashville. This is amazing. So exciting. Now we can see what the weather will be like 200 miles away in Atlanta, I say sarcastically. It's weird what seems to get people off can be so drastically different. Art, clothes, cars, and, apparently, TV antennas. Later that night, we are cuddled up on the couch watching the news. The broadcast is interrupted as the screen fills with static. The static only lasts a few seconds before the screen fills with a foreign landscape. I don't mean foreign like another country. It's like no place I've ever seen before. The sky was a creamy purple. The setting sun hit the underside of the clouds, putting off a pink glow. The swirl of pink and white clouds with a purple backdrop was stunning. The trees had the first glance impression of a giant blue mushroom. They were square, and the bark smoothed up to the branches. The branches then jutted out like veins, topped with light blue leaves. The grass was the same light blue as the leaves. The landscape looked like a beautiful real-life version of something you would see in a child's coloring book. The woman speaking to the camera looked a lot like your everyday person with a few unique features. The nose was smooth with 2 small slits for nostrils. Just below her hairline were 2 antennas about 6 inches long that stuck upwards into the air. Her eyes slightly larger and more round than normal humans. The pupils were exactly what you picture when someone says, "big puppy dog eyes." She spoke in a series of noise that sounded like no earthly language I had ever heard before. It was a language like what you would imagine a tribe hidden deep in the Amazon, had never had human contact outside of themselves would speak. After about 20 seconds, the static returned for a brief second, and then back to the local news. Speechless for the moment, Wayne and I looked at each other, slack-jawed and eyebrows raised. What the hell was that? I finally found the words I couldn't manage to spit out a few moments ago. A prank, I'm sure. Wayne said, sounding uncertain of his own words. I didn't think much else about it until it happened again the next night. The same landscape with that same alien woman. She was standing there with wide eyes, looking into space when she finally snapped out of her trance. She was fidgety with her hands. Her voice sounded panicked. She was still speaking in that same unknown language. The camera pans 180 degrees, and I can see a black oval in the sky. As the camera focused, I could make out details in the object hovering in the purple sky. It was long, sleek, and solid black. It had wings and 2 tail fins similar to planes here in the real world. It never moved, just hovered silently. The camera pans back to the woman. She looks at the camera, taking short, shallow breaths. You can see the fear in her eyes. She says a few words I can't understand before the static returns, followed shortly by our local news. Hacking a news feed for a prank is nothing new, so I set to the internet to find out what was going on. After hours of deep diving the web, I couldn't find anything. Even the local news station was oblivious to the fact some prankster had hacked their weather report. I called, and they told me I was the only person to report such a disturbance on the news feed. Frustrated, I couldn't find the prank source. I try to put it out of my mind. Weeks go by with nothing happening out of the ordinary. The frustration fades and it begins to become a distant memory. Through my research, I came across a radio broadcast. The broadcast was an adaptation of the novel War of the Worlds, and the broadcast caused mass panic. This seems to be the situation, except my household appears to be the only one experiencing this prank. Wayne and I sit anxiously in front of the television the next night, awaiting our special broadcast. Right on time, it appears. No woman reported this time. Just a shot of a city I can only compare to the likes of New York City. Skyscrapers jut into the creamy purple sky. 10 of those black flying objects are over the city. No longer hovering, but silently moving over the city now. As they move over the city, they begin to speed up and drop objects in random spurts. Each spurt comes in 3-second intervals. They were dropping 15 to 30 of the things at once. As these objects began to start making contact with the ground and buildings, it became apparent what they were. They're bombs. Hundreds of tiny explosions erupt, taking out smaller buildings immediately. Only the skyscrapers are left standing in shambles. The city looks to be evacuated, but still, sirens blare in a failed attempt to warn anyone that had decided not to leave. If anyone had stayed behind, I can't imagine them making it out of this alive. After only a few minutes, the onslaught was over. Most of the city reduced to a smoldering pile of rubble. Just like before, the screen fills with static, and back to our local news. I call the police. They repeat what everyone else tells me. Some pranksters saw our oversized antenna, and they're sending us a feed to screw with us. They told us to ignore it, and the pranksters would soon get bored and leave us alone. I don't believe them at this point. I've never seen anything like this before, and it's much too high quality for some prankster to be making movie quality scenes like this. It doesn't take long for the feed to appear again. It happened the very next night. This time, the beautiful purple sky was filled with thousands of black specks. Those flying objects look very similar to a stealth plane. I've done a lot of research since the first two signals came across, and they look like F-117 Nighthawks to be exact. Except they could hover perfectly still like a helicopter, but with no rotor blades and silent. The camera pans to the familiar face of the lady from the first two interferences. This time her big eyes are red and puffy as tears roll down her face. Her once stiff antennas hung limply over her face. She said nothing this time. The only sounds are the sobs that occasionally escape her lips. She lets out a shocked gasp before dropping the camera. The video feed goes black as it drops face down into the light blue grass. I can hear her screaming in the background, along with the sounds of a struggling. A thud can be heard. I can only imagine it's the sound of a blunt object smashing into the lady's skull as the screaming immediately stops. I can now hear footsteps approaching the camera. The camera is picked up by someone that keeps themselves unknown. A blurry version of the lady clears up as the camera slowly comes into focus. She's sitting upright on the ground with her hands presumably tied behind her back. Dazed, she raised her head to reveal a gash above her right eye. A stream of blood runs down the contours of her face. The camera zooms in close. Now you can see the fear in her eyes as a pair of camouflage pants walks into view. A man kneels beside her. He looks familiar. Not that I know him personally, but in the way that he looks like he, instead of the woman alien sitting on the ground. That's when I notice a patch on his chest that read U.S. Air Force. Then he speaks to her in a language I can understand perfectly. Your kind is weak. That is only the beginning. This is our planet now. The man then places a pistol to the side of the woman's head, and then static. I grab Wayne's hand and squeeze. We stare at each other silently before I bury my head in his chest. It's not real, babe. It's just a prank. Wayne said as he caressed my hair, trying to comfort me. I want to believe this is an elaborate prank, but part of me can't help but feel sorry for the woman in the video. The local news comes back on, and that's when I hear the reporter say something that sent chills down my spine. In other news, scientists have discovered a planet in a neighboring solar system, one that they believe has an Earth-like atmosphere and could potentially be habitable and support life. My grandparents' house has always felt wrong. For the longest time, there wasn't anything specific I could point out to for this feeling. The feeling was like a wind that blows a little too cold, or a night that's just too quiet. It's a small, one-story, 3-bedroom brick house nestled in a short, wooded neighborhood in a small, rural town in Georgia. That side of my family has lived, well, a difficult life. It would be too tedious to list all of the misfortunes, small and large, that have plagued them over the years, but it was always made me feel like visiting them was a roll of the dice. That isn't to say that I don't have plenty of happy childhood memories there. Some of my fondest childhood memories were playing barefoot in the front yard while it lightly rained on a sunny day, building inventions in my grandfather's workshop, riding my pony around their pasture. I always associated the distinctive smell and taste of water straight from a watering house with playing there in the summer. But then there was the creepy little coincidences, like how when I was a kid, when I was visiting, I would listen to these scary storybooks on tape. There was this one story where a guy hung himself in a forest, but he was too tall to hang because his legs reached the ground. So he dug a hole with his feet while he was dangling. I always imagined this scene play out in my head in the wooded lot across the street from the house, in a strangely specific place. Years later, the neighbors from across the street took his own life in that exact location where I always pictured that scene. In the early 90s, my grandfather converted the carport into a living room for their house. He still tells stories about how I used to run my walker across the bare plywood floor before he got the carpet down, leaving tiny footprints in the sawdust. This living room was built with 3 enclosing walls and an open entryway to the front and breakfast room. I have always had a sense of being watched while in this room. This room is the primary guest room for grandchildren staying the night. During holidays or big family gatherings, when we slept there, all of my cousins would pull every extra mattress and air mattress in the house into this one room because nobody wanted to sleep by themselves in any of the bedrooms. I always took one of the bedrooms, given the option. It's difficult to explain exactly, but when I slept in this room, especially when alone, I had this chilling feeling that told me to never stare out into the darkness of the room, and especially not to glance out the windows into the night. So when the bedrooms were full, and I was relegated to the living room sofa, I would sleep facing into it. When I was 19, my father, who was living with his parents at the time, ended up in jail after he got on a bender and attacked me and my sister while we were visiting for the 4th. My grandmother insisted we stayed the night at their house, worried that I would be too upset to drive the 3 hours back home. My great-grandmother was having health issues at the time, so she was living in one of the extra rooms. The other room I left for my sister, as it was her room anyway. At least when we stayed there. I slept in the living room. The gloom that night seemed almost palpable as I stepped into sleep under the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on the mantel, laying inward on the sofa with the blanket pulled up to my ears. I hoped that I could just drift off to sleep. That's when the antique clock stopped ticking. I should have known then not to turn over, not to look towards the right-hand corner of the room. A wave of dread and despair washed over me, but it arrived too late. I was already rolling over to see why the clock stopped, and it wasn't until then that I realized it wasn't just the clock. I could no longer hear the soft hum of the old freezer they kept in a nearby storage closet, nor the sound of the breeze gently rustling the tree branches outside. All I could hear was the sound of my own breath. In the right-hand corner of the room, the corner I always felt never to look into when alone at night, stood the shape of a man, illuminated by the window behind it. It was mostly shrouded in darkness, except for the eyes. A streak of light cast from the edge of a curtained window on the other side of the room lay across its face, and it stared back at me with eyes painfully wide and bulging, as if it had peeled away its own eyelids so it could see more. It was impossibly tall, but its feet just barely reached the floor. I shut my eyes closed so hard they watered. I pulled the blanket over my head and rolled back over and just hoped I wouldn't feel anything touch my exposed back. A moment hung in the air for what seemed like minutes but was probably seconds, and the clock started ticking again. I laid there in that position for the rest of the night, not sleeping, but never opening my eyes. I haven't slept over at that house since then. When I visit for holidays, I always politely turn down the request to stay over and go to church with my family in the morning. As soon as the sun sets, I start looking for an excuse to head home. I know that there is something wrong with that place. and I know when it's time to go home. My sister and I have always had a great relationship. You know, the ones where you'd chase each other around with frying pans whilst the other one begs for mom and dad. And then 5 minutes later, you're fine and talking about the cute boy in your school. Yeah, that's the kind of relationship my sister and I had. Growing up, I was the oldest of 7 siblings, which, undoubtedly, was a whole lot of us. Thankfully, they were split up between my mom and my dad. I don't know how I'd survive if they weren't. My sister and I, however, we always shared a bond that was much closer than my other siblings. We were only 18 months apart in age, so we grew up doing all kinds of stuff together before our younger siblings were born. The next one being was when I was almost 5 years old. All throughout elementary and middle school, she was my mini-me. And of course we had the typical, "You're wearing my shirt, give it back" arguments. But it never lasted more than 5 minutes before we were back to loving each other again. I had stopped seeing much of my sister once we got into high school, however, and I decided to live with my mom and her with my dad. We'd still see each other in the hallways at school and sometimes on holidays, but really, it felt as if we had already grown up and moved out and lived separate lives. We stayed in touch a lot over text. That was our only lifeline, it seemed. I have since gone and graduated high school and live on my own, and my sister has done pretty much the same. She's graduating next month and lives with her boyfriend. We still text and call as if we did when we were in school, which I guess was why it was such a surprise when I heard a knock on my door today, opening it to find my sister standing there. "Well, this surely is a surprise. I wasn't expecting you. Please, come in." I greeted her, much as if she were an old friend. Of course, at this point, she really was. I hadn't seen her in so long. We sat in the living room just chatting away about everything we missed out on when I must have made a mistake. "Is Pat not with you today?" I asked her. Immediately she went pale and froze, as if she saw a ghost. She went silent for a few minutes before quickly muttering, "No, he's not." "Oh, okay. Sorry I asked." I breezed past. Maybe they had broken up or were going through a rough patch, and she didn't want to tell me. I'd been there a few times myself with my exes, so I got how hard it was to touch on the subject, especially when it was sprung on you. I tried to steer the conversation back to anything else, but my sister remained uncomfortable for the rest of our interaction. I felt bad for even opening my mouth in the first place. "I'm going to use the restroom really fast, but please help yourself to anything. My home is your home." I addressed to her before getting up off my couch and making my trek to the bathroom. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket as I reached the bathroom door, shutting and locking it behind me. I pulled my phone out as my sister's name flashed on the screen. That's odd. Why didn't she just holler at me? Why text me when I'm right here? I laughed it off before unlocking my phone and reading the text that was sent. "Hey, just wanted to text and catch up. It's been a while since I've heard from you. Call me sometime so I know you're not dead, okay?" My eye flicked on the words on the screen 3 or 4 more times before a small gasp left my throat. This had to be a sick sort of joke. It had to be. My sister was downstairs right now. It couldn't possibly be my sister texting me. I glanced over at my bathroom door, suddenly 10 times more uneasy than when I had entered the bathroom to see a line of light coming from underneath the door, blocked by 2 shadows of what I can only assume is feet. I can't bear to unlock the door and be face to face with my sister, but there's no windows for me to escape from in here either. I'm afraid to call the police in case she hears me, but what would I even say? My sister's in my house, but she's not really my sister. She just looks like my sister. Yeah, right. Because that's believable. Besides, my phone is almost dead. It's on about 3% battery now. I can only hope that my fiancé comes home before my sister realizes I'm not coming out of the bathroom. Lord only knows what she'll do to me then. My parents dragged me along to the square, even though I had repeatedly told them that there was no point in me going. They kept telling me that it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience and that I would regret it for the rest of my life if I missed out. I kept pointing out to them that I was completely deaf, so wouldn't be able to hear anything, but my mother promised she would translate everything for me. My mother hugged me after I agreed to stay and told me that she loved me. As the day progressed, I stood in the stifling heat and kept getting shoved about by people as they tried to get closer to the stage. My father offered to place me on his shoulders, but I declined as I was almost a teenager now. There was a change in the atmosphere in the crowd, and I glanced up onto the stage to see a bunch of high-ranking clergy on stage. As they began speaking, I looked over to my mother, but she was too entranced with what they were saying to translate for me. I glanced over my shoulder and noticed there were dozens of smiling children crowded around me. One of the children tried to ask me a question, but he was suddenly forced backwards as the crowd moved. I tried to spot him again, but couldn't see through the wall of people. There was a blinding light from the front of the stage, and I spun around to see the most beautiful woman I had ever seen walking forward. The clergymen looked confused for a second, but quickly composed themselves and stepped aside. The woman walked up to the microphone and glanced around at the hushed crowd that was awaiting her first words. I felt her eyes linger on me for a second, and a shiver of dread went down my spine for some reason. She finally opened her mouth and began to speak. It was at this moment that I felt a splatter of rain fall on my face and quickly wiped it off with my sleeve. A wave of confusion crossed my face as my sleeve was now all red. I looked up at my mom and was horrified to see that blood was pouring from her nose and eyes, but she had a weird look of contentment across her face. My father slowly slid to his knees with blood pouring out of all of his orifices. I turned around to ask for help, but was met by a sea of blood-smeared smiling faces. I stood there in shock as one by one they slowly collapsed to the floor. I felt a tap on my shoulder and slowly turned around. The woman stood there with a pleasant smile on her face and gave me a hug before turning around and disappearing into a white light. I stood all alone in the square surrounded by smiling corpses, and finally understood why God had never tried to communicate with us before.